These are 5 reasons why you should be investing in Melbourne in 2025.
And throughout the episode, we're going to be discussing areas that we would buy in and areas we wouldn't buy in as well.
The population growth they're actually predicting around 170,000 new residents per annum.
Yeah,
which is a lot.
That's crazy. It is a relatively affordable city to live in. And to have that, it's not surprising that population is growing so fast.
Melbourne is actually set to become Australia's largest city.
Yeah.
So currently Sydney holds that title, but by mid-2030s, that's going to actually shift over to Melbourne being the largest city in Australia. So Melbourne has obviously, it's on everyone's radar at the moment. Perth has sort of calmed down on everyone's podcasts. Everyone's now talking about Melbourne, hence why we're talking about it today. And we're going to be running through some of those reasons why everyone's talking about Melbourne.
Yeah. Look, it's still so affordable. So that's, probably why a lot of the noise is out there. But let's get into the 5 points where you think it's a good market.
So number 1 is Melbourne is actually set to become Australia's largest city.
Yeah.
So currently Sydney holds that title, but by mid-2030s, that's going to actually shift over to Melbourne being the largest city in Australia.
Yeah. And that's just, investing 101. You've obviously got your more market-specific demand, supply and demand indicators, but a very high-level supply and demand indicator is purely dwellings to population.
And population growth.
Yeah.
And for that to be overtaking Sydney, it indicates, obviously, that the population growth is a lot higher than Sydney.
Yeah.
So there is going to be this ongoing demand in that area.
Yeah. And it's not surprising. Newcastle in some respects is more expensive than Melbourne. Obviously, not a lot of suburbs like Toorak, but it is a relatively affordable city to live in. And to have that, it's not surprising that population is growing so fast.
Yeah. So some of those things, the population growth they're actually predicting around 170,000 new residents per annum.
Yeah,
which is a lot.
That's crazy.
When we think about what's the total immigration levels in Australia, about 450 a year, is it? So a huge...
Well, on average, it's 250.
250, yeah. Yeah, so a huge portion are going directly to Melbourne.
That's crazy.
That immigration, that migration is also locally as well. So
I think that 250 that we've had historically is the sort of average. I think that will increase to probably 300 as an average.
Yep.
I think because that's a big contributor to our economy as well.
Oh, for sure.
But for 50% of those... going to Melbourne, that's pretty crazy to think.
So in a city, when you think about a city that's growing so quickly, there is a demand obviously for housing, infrastructure, services. All of those things are very much needed. And that moves us on to point number 2, is the world-class infrastructure projects are literally reshaping the city.
They are.
They've invested $11 billion into a metro tunnel that's due to open this year, which is going to obviously connect those outer suburbs to the city and make it a lot quicker and easier to get into the city to go to work.
Yeah. Well, most of our listeners are New South Wales based. A lot of them would be familiar with the West Connects tunnel and the North Connects tunnel. A lot of the transport links throughout Sydney and the effect that it had on all of those suburbs that benefited from that connectivity to the city.
And when you think about moving to those outer suburbs, one of the main things that comes to your head at that time is how long is it going to take me to get to work?
Yeah.
Like it might cost me $200,000 less to buy in that outer suburb, but it's going to take me now an hour and a half longer.
Well, a lot of people, especially first home buyers, or young couples who don't have a family, they can have that lower maintenance lifestyle. You're in a situation then where you go, all right, well, do I go and spend $700,000 on a 2-bedroom unit near the city? Or do I go and buy a 3 and 4 bedroom house because I can hold it longer because there's now a train or a tram that connects me to my workplace in the city?
100%. And the areas in that area, like areas in Melbourne, which are going to be close to those future train stations, are already seeing a spike in growth.
Yeah.
So,
and when we talk about that supply and demand with infrastructure, yes, you've got all of these other things that facilitate housing, and we are going to see an increased supply in housing with greenfield estates popping up, but more rezoning from low density to medium and high density in the inner city suburbs. So supply will increase, but for good properties in good suburbs, supply is decreasing because they're rezoning low density to medium. So there's going to be less supply of houses in really premium suburbs, and there's going to be more supply of that saturated 1 and 2 bedroom cheap unit market.
For sure. So big one, next one for me, being a finance nerd and all.
Yeah.
The economic diversity in Melbourne was ranked 6 globally, so number 6 globally and number 1 in Australia.
Yeah.
So basically what that means is that the diversity of the economy is the best in Australia. So you look at that versus Perth, which is very highly reliant on your ores and your minerals and all those sort of mining things. You look at that area over there, they don't have that transport and all those things that really props up a lot of the economy because they're on the other side of Australia. It doesn't help.
Yeah.
But when you look at Melbourne, it's the number 1 economy in Australia.
Yeah, and for people who don't know what metrics are involved in there, it's all of the sectors, including finance, health, tech, education.
Yep.
Every single thing that contributes to our economy is in Melbourne. So you're mitigating your risk in that respect with, if one industry has some sort of effect from tariffs from Trump,
A downturn of something.
some sort of downturn in one of those sectors, your property's not going to be as affected because you've got other things in that local economy to stimulate the property market.
Yeah. You look at some places like, I know there's a lot of people trying to flog stuff in those regional Queensland hubs where they're building gas plants and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What happens if that closes down?
Yeah.
All of a sudden you've got all these vacancies. We've seen it in Muswellbrook and these areas in New South Wales where very heavy reliant on one industry. That one industry has a bit of a downturn.
Yeah.
All of a sudden there's empty investment properties everywhere.
One of the biggest ones at the moment, which is pretty relevant for me, is Mount Gambier. Mount Gambier is in Adelaide. It's had significant growth over the last decade, and it's forecast to continue to do so. But one of the main drivers for that is a renewable energy hub going near Mount Gambier. There's a lot of investment, but you're purely reliant on that renewable energy hub.
Yep.
If you take that money out of that economy, you're left with the owner-occupied buyers in that market. So although, to finish off on that market might do well, but if from an investment perspective, just consider that risk.
It is a riskier. It's like you got to weigh up the risk and the reward.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're willing to risk it in that market, go for it.
And it's the same with all of these other suburbs that we mention. It depends on so many things. You can't just say one suburb.
No.
So it really depends on multiple factors.
Yeah, and a lot of these are good versus excellent as well.
Exactly.
It's not a bad place. So fourth one is it's still much more affordable than Sydney, even with all these factors.
Yeah.
So you can buy something decent. You can buy a villa or, townhouse within, maybe 10, 15 Ks of the city for 650, 700K.
Yeah. The big thing for me is it's affordable for first home buyers and families. For a big portion of our country trying to get into the property market, it's still relatively affordable, to take advantage for a lot of the schemes that are on offer to enter that market because they're sub 1 mil, most of the suburbs.
The one thing to mention though, yes, it's more affordable in areas, high yield pockets. One thing to mention is a lot of those yields are coming from apartments in the city.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned earlier that there was 1,900.
Yeah. So from an investment perspective, a lot of people buy in Melbourne to try and get yield, and they're buying cheap apartments. When you're buying those cheap apartments, there's one of the biggest things to consider is the supply and demand dynamics in that individual market. Now, I filtered on realestate.com earlier, sub $700,000 for 1 and 2 bedroom apartments in the city and surrounding suburbs is 1,970 properties for sale. Now, if there's 1,000 buyers in that market for those type of properties, who's going to buy the other 970?
Yeah.
So purely from that high level, those it's not like they're going to go backward. You might make 20, 30% over a decade, but that's insignificant growth. You might as well just leave your money in the bank.
Yeah, that's right. It's by the time you're paying your interest and having that yield, it's not.
But I mean, again, situational, because if you're looking for it for an Airbnb opportunity or
Something with high yields.
You know, another dwelling for you for a holiday or a weekender because you like travelling to Melbourne so often. Well, so be it. Just buy one.
Yeah. So last one everyone wants to know about is what suburbs areas. Look, I'll mention the first one that everyone's been talking about for a long time is Melton.
Yeah. It will continue to grow.
I don't think it's a bad, like I always say, if they're talking about it on podcasts or a taxi driver knows about it, it's too late. But I don't think it is too late to buy in that area.
No.
Interesting stat that I came across was that the number of registered businesses have doubled in 5 years in that area.
Yeah.
So that's an indication that there is a demand for that.
Yeah.
The number of registered businesses wouldn't be doubling if there was no demand for that area.
Comes back to economic diversity and infrastructure, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, you got more you need more cleaners, you need more everything in that area, shops. So it is a good sign that that area, that whole corridor is going to do really well. Yeah. You mentioned some others before the podcast.
Yeah, just to touch on Melton, a lot of people are going to look at Melton and say, oh, you know, fuck, there's been 5,000 building approvals been submitted, so there's going to be an oversupply. Have a look at the population forecast for Melton. Yeah. There's like 60,000 people per year.
There's a reason why 5,000 properties are being built there. These developers are not just winging it.
Yeah.
They know what's going on.
Yeah.
So whether it's a good idea, it's up to you, but that is one area that everyone's talking about. Yeah. In my opinion, not a bad choice.
Yeah, so there's a couple of others, but again, it comes back to the situation. Are you owner-occupier? What price point are you buying at? Are you looking to expand rapidly? But Truganina, we spoke about Truganina before, Brad.
I had a client that bought there about 5 or 6 years ago. I absolutely thought they were mental for buying in an area like that. It was one of the Stockland, I think it was a Stockland estate.
It's similar to Melton.
But that was via a buyer's agent, and I was like, I don't think this guy knows what he's doing. Anyway, fast forward, and it's gone up. What was 125%?
Truganina's done 175%.
175% in 10 years.
Yeah.
That's mental.
That's crazy growth.
So, sorry, buyer's agent.
And that's the thing, you know, a lot of people say, I'm not spending 15 grand on a buyer's agent. If you went and bought in a suburb that did 75% growth, you just missed out on 100% of your returns.
Yeah. I think they bought it for $750 or something back then, so you lost out on $750,000. So don't listen to me, listen to your buyer's agent. But yeah, it just shows that some of these areas that are established, and that was one of the reasons I didn't really like it, was because it was a expanding estate area, but they were putting a Stockland shopping centre and a few different things in there, so it did have potential, but I didn't think it had that much potential.
Yeah.
And I think there is areas in that area that are going to continue to have that. And
that's growth. What we said there before with good and excellent. You know, there's been a lot of markets, like Melton, for example, is 125% compared to Truganina at 175. Yeah. 125 to 175. So there's good to excellent. But in many respects, Melton's excellent at that growth as well.
For sure.
Because there's a lot of other suburbs that did like 60 to 80% growth. So in terms of other markets, obviously, you know, your big markets like Toorak, you know, you've got a lot of wealth in that market that's going to continue to grow. Carlton, all of these suburbs that have good owner-occupied appeal are decreasing supply because they're changing zoning requirements in that area.
Everything's becoming higher density.
Yeah. But then, you know, those more affordable owner-occupied markets that are connected to train links or public transport routes.
Yeah, and we've just talked about the infrastructure, the metro tunnel.
Yeah.
If you are looking to invest in that area, maybe look where that infrastructure is being created and then work backwards from there.
Yeah, there's a good map online. You can see exactly where each of the train points are or the tram stops.
That's what I'll be doing.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for today. 5 reasons why to invest in Melbourne in 2025.
Yeah. See you on the next one.